Hello, we have already discussed the role that narratives play in our day to day lives, the role it has played in history, how it is an important facet of identity formation, how it is connected to myths, how it is connected to cultures. Now we'll take a look at how uh, ancient narrative techniques were formulated. And as far as the Western tradition is concerned, the contributions made by the ancient Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle cannot be ignored. Now, all of you have already studied about Plato's theory of ideas or forms, uh, in which he says that uh, there is an ultimate or perfect form of everything, and that form is imitated in the real life, in the real world, and the poet imitates that imitation. That was his argument against poetry, right? Because it was an imitation of an imitation. Therefore, it is twice removed from reality, and therefore it has no place in a democratic society. That is why, in his work, The Republic, he uh, did not want poets and poetry in an ideal republic. You might remember the theory of ideas. I'll explain it once again. He believed that there is a there's a perfect form for everything, which is like a blueprint, which is like a set of instructions uh, for people to follow. So everything, every individual, every idea has a perfect form uh, that is created by the creator. But what you find in real life is just an imitation of that ideal or perfect form. So if you see a tree uh, in real life, that is just an imitation of that ideal form. And if a poet writes about that tree, it's an imitation of an imitation. So poetry is twice removed from reality, according to Plato, and that is why he discarded poets and poetry from his ideal republic. Now, his disciple Aristotle was of a different point of view. He believed that poetry is essential in any society, and it is nobler than history, according to Aristotle. Now, why did he say that? He believed Aristotle believed that the function of a poet is not to relate what has happened, what, but what may happen. Uh, because poetry is more philosophical and higher than history. Okay, so Aristotle supported poetry by saying that uh, poetry is much more philosophical, it is much more nobler because a poet relates uh, not what has happened, but what may happen. So, in that regard, he expresses the universal, whereas history is all about a particular. When historians relate something, they relate to a particular event, right? They talk about a particular event, a particular king or a queen or a particular war. Poetry, on the other hand, is universal in nature. So Aristotle believed that poetry is much nobler and more philosophical than history. So he differed from his master Plato in that regard. Now, in relation to that, we have to also talk about mimesis and diegesis. Now, what is mimesis? I've given you a very formal, a very detailed description, which is mimesis is a linguistic, philosophical, or cosmic phenomenon of an eternal model. Sorry about that spelling mistake. Of an eternal model of the world using language, thought, and material. It is a linguistic, philosophical, or cosmic phenomenon of an eternal model of the world using language, thought, and material. Now, this definition might seem very confusing and very complex. The simplest definition of mimesis is imitation or enactment. Action is required. A simpler definition is given here. An act of depiction, a dramatic imitation of events and characters, is known as mimesis. For example, a play is a mimetic. A play, a movie, uh, uh, a serial, um, or a web series. All these things are mimetic in nature. Why? Because uh, there are actors who enact characters. They dramatize events, right? So it is an enactment. It involves action. It is all about imitation, mimesis. Now, Aristotle talked about mimesis because he believed that a poet is an imitator. He imitates what he sees. He represents what he sees around him. But he believed that a poet has a noble purpose because he performs a moral function. Art cannot be separated from morals. That's what Aristotle believed. Anyway, remember, mimesis is a depiction or an enactment of what happens around you. So, just obviously, Aristotle didn't talk about movies or web series, but uh, pe- drama, movies, serials, all these can be included under the category of mimesis because the actors or the artists in these uh, creative forms reenact what they see around them. They imitate, right? So movies and serials and the web series that you see on on online platforms are all modern day examples of mimesis. So, what do you mean by diegesis? When we are talking about mimesis, you cannot ignore diegesis. Now, diegesis is the representation of reality. The narrator indirectly discloses The narrator indirectly discloses the story or the plot, but the process of discovering the character's feelings and thoughts is done by the reader. Now, that is diegesis. In mimesis, the artist will directly portray what he wants us to uh, understand. In diegesis, on the other hand, the narrator is disclosing the story or the plot, but the process of discovering the underlying layers of feelings and thoughts uh, rests with the reader. So the reader has got an important part to play in as far as diegesis is concerned. Diegesis is the representation of reality. The narrator only gives us bits and pieces. The rest of the job, that is the analyzing the truth, discovering the truth, rests with the reader. And this process of discovering the truth is diegesis. Now, what are the examples of diegesis? Poetry, epic poetry, uh, novels. These are all forms of diegesis because when you're reading a novel, the novelist will give you the characters, will give you the events. He'll narrate what has happened in the life of these characters, but the 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 characters' feelings and thoughts, the rest of the interpretation is to be done by the reader. We are the ones who analyze the character, right? Uh, we have to read between the lines. When you're reading a poem, the the basic skeleton of that poem will be given to us by the poet. The rest of the analysis, the rest of the interpretation is made by us, the readers. So that is diegesis. Okay, so understand this difference. So what is the basic difference between mimesis and diegesis? Mimesis is all about action. Diegesis is all about telling. In mimesis, the actor or the artist acts out everything for you. In diegesis, on the other hand, the narrator tells us certain things, but the rest of the interpretation is to be made by the reader. Okay, so these are very important aspects of narration, mimesis and diegesis. Both are parts of narration, right? But done in two different ways. Now, another aspect, reality and representation. Narration, as we had seen earlier, is the representation of an event or a series of events. Now, what do you mean by representation of a narrative? One, it could mean the process used for the presentation of an idea, event, action, or characters. Or it could also mean the outcome that is created at the end of the narrative process. So, the term representation, as far as narration is concerned, can have two possible meanings or two possible aspects. First one, the process that is used for the presentation of an idea, events, actions, or characters can be called representation. The process can be referred to as representation. The second one, the outcome that comes at the end of the narrative process, can also be called as representation. What are the characteristics of narratives? First one, narratives are a type of artificial construction which do not usually present in spontaneous conversation. So narratives are have a bit of artificiality about them. Why? Because in everyday, normal, spontaneous conversations, you do not come across narratives. So there is a certain sense of artificiality about narratives. Second point, there's a certain degree of prefabrication in narratives, yet they pose a sense of familiarity. There is a degree of prefabrication, that is, there's a certain sense of artifice, there's a certain sense of it being made up, but a sense of familiarity is also there. For instance, the major characters that you find in the novels, like Charles Dickens' novels or George Eliot's novels or Thomas Hardy's novels, you realize that there is a certain kind of artifice in the characters that you find, but you feel a sense of familiarity with these characters. Right? You can associate with Oliver Twist. You know that it's not real, the character is fictional, but you sympathize with the boy, right? Oliver Twist. So there is a degree of prefabrication, yet they pose a sense of familiarity. The third point, narration has a trajectory. That it has a movement. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. It has a proper trajectory. Fourth one, narratives always have a teller. No, you need someone to tell you the story. So narratives always have a teller. Fifth one, narratives are sequences of logically or chronologically related events. So what do you find in narratives? A number of events could be found there, and they are sequences of logically or chronologically related events. They are related to, these events are related to each other in one way or the other. Unrelated events do not form part of a narrative. That's the sixth point. Locations that are depicted in a narrative are given distinct characteristics. Okay. There are events, there are characters, there are locations as well in a narrative. And these locations are given distinct characteristics. Then, seven, presence of an omniscient narrator. Now, what do you mean by omniscient? Someone who knows everything. Now, in most of the narratives, you'll find this. There's an omniscient narrator who knows, who has a godlike ability to go everywhere and to know everything. And this narrator possesses power and control derived from unlimited knowledge. And what is this unlimited knowledge? This narrator knows everything about everybody. Right? You'll find that in stories. In most of the stories that we have read as kids, there is an omniscient narrator. No, he might not be a part of the story, but he knows everything. He knows everything. Know what a particular character is thinking. What is that character's past? What is it? What is his future going to be? Everything that this narrator knows. That is why he's called an omniscient narrator. The meaning of omniscient: someone who knows everything. So these are the characteristics of narratives. So with that, we can end this particular video. We'll continue with more videos to finish the portion. Thank you.